Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into the muddy boots of a medieval peasant and see just how long you might last. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Imagine waking up before dawn in a thatched hut, barely holding together, the damp straw mattress itching against your skin. Your breath forms a little puff in the cold, dark air, and your first sensation of the day is the sharp pang of hunger gnawing at your belly. Again, the fire has long since gone out, and the only light comes from the thin glow of a dying ember in the hearth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop a comment below with your location and local time? It's always fun to see where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, if you can even call it a bed, and feel the cold earth beneath your bare feet. The room smells faintly of damp wood, with a stronger note of smoke and something a bit earthy. The chickens cluck softly outside, not quite awake yet, and the sheep in the pen are still huddled together for warmth. You glance over at your family. Your wife is still curled up. Your youngest is coughing lightly in his sleep, and the baby stirs but doesn't cry. Outside, it's still dark, but you know it's time to get up. The village bell hasn't rung yet, but you don't need it. You're already behind. You throw on your rough woolen tunic, patched at the elbows, and tie it with a bit of frayed rope that's seen better days. Your hands are already sore from yesterday's work, the skin cracked from the cold and raw from gripping rough tools. As you step outside, the frost crunches underfoot, and the air is so cold, it feels like it could snap your nose right off. Your breath fogs in front of you like a tiny cloud, and the faintest light is starting to peek over the horizon. A pale, wintry blue that promises no warmth, only another long, gray day. You trudge toward the fields, your boots caked in mud from the last rainfall, the mud clinging to your soles like an unwelcome burden. The smell of wet earth and dung fills the air, a reminder that the animals haven't been mucked out yet, and that chore will fall to you later. You pass a neighbor's hut and hear a muffled argument inside, something about a missing hen. You sigh, knowing full well that a stolen chicken is a serious matter. After all, that's dinner for a week. The fields themselves are still cloaked in a thin veil of mist. The stubble of the last harvest pokes through the frosty ground, and you know you'll be breaking your back again today, turning the earth with a heavy wooden plow. Your breath feels sharp in your lungs, and for a moment, you pause, letting the cold sink into your bones. It's moments like this that historians still argue over. Whether the life of a peasant was an endless slog of misery, or whether there were brief flashes of joy, a shared laugh in the fields, the warmth of a fire on a lucky night, the fleeting sweetness of a stolen apple. Right now, though, it feels like the misery has the upper hand. You glance at the sky, gray clouds gathering. There's a chance of rain later, which will make the day even worse. Your stomach growls loudly, and you remember there's no proper breakfast waiting for you. Just a crust of bread, if you're lucky, maybe dipped in ale that's more sour than anything else. But that comes later. For now, it's the fields, the cold, and the long, slow grind of survival. And as you look out over the frostbitten landscape, the thought strikes you, can you really survive a day of this? You glance back at the hut one last time, watching as smoke begins to curl from the chimney. Your wife has started the fire, at least. But the thought of warmth is a distant luxury. Right now, you've got to fuel yourself for the day ahead. Breakfast, if it can even be called that, waits on the rickety wooden table inside. A loaf of coarse rye bread, hard as a rock, and a thin, watery ale that's more like slightly boozy dishwater. The bread smells faintly of mold, a reminder that the grain was stretched thin this year, and the miller's stones haven't been sharpened in months. You break off a piece, the crust so tough you have to gnaw at it like a dog with a bone. It crumbles in your mouth, tasting more like dust than nourishment. You sip the ale, hoping it might make the bread go down easier, but the sourness makes your face scrunch up in a wince. You cough, wiping your mouth on your sleeve, and glance at the small hunk of cheese in the corner. It's hard, yellowed, and smells a bit like old socks, but you know you'll need it later. A few of the other villagers pass by your doorway, nodding in silent, sleepy acknowledgement. There's old Thomas, limping along with a crooked back, mumbling something about his aching knees. And young Agnes, just barely 15, already with a baby on her hip, yawning so wide you can almost hear her jaw pop. The rhythm of life here doesn't change much. Wake, work, eat if you can, and collapse into a restless sleep. It's strange, though. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants were truly malnourished all the time. Some say they managed to scrape together enough calories with grains, beans, and the occasional scraps of meat. Others argue the records are patchy at best, and the average peasant probably felt hungry more often than full. Standing here, gnawing on your tough bread, it sure feels like hunger wins out. Your wife gives you a tight smile as she ladles a bit of leftover pottage into a cracked bowl for the children. It's thin, more water than anything else, flecked with a few sad pieces of cabbage, and maybe, if you're lucky, a tiny scrap of bacon fat floating on the surface like a treasure. You know you'll get what's left after the little ones have eaten. The fire crackles, but it's a stingy warmth, barely cutting the chill that seeps in through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls. The air smells of damp earth and smoke, and your stomach lets out a low, complaining growl. You glance at the door. Time to go back out. The fields won't tend themselves, and the Lord's share isn't going to plant itself either. The thought of the manor looms large in your mind. Those high walls, the better food, the warm fire, and the Lord himself, probably still asleep in his feather bed while you chew on crusts in the cold. But you shake your head and take another bite of bread, feeling it scrape against your teeth. Life isn't fair, and no one ever promised it would be. You've got your family, your little patch of land, and your stubborn will to keep going. And really, what more is there? Outside, the frost has begun to melt into a sticky, clinging mud. Your boots squelch as you step into the yard, where the geese honk irritably, and a scraggly dog noses around for scraps. You pause for a moment, watching the sky shift from gray to a slightly lighter gray, and take a slow breath. It's going to be a long, hungry day, but for now, you have bread in your belly, well, sort of, and work to do. The plow stands where you left it yesterday, leaning like an old, broken soldier on the edge of the field. It's made of rough-hewn wood, splintered from years of use, with an iron tip dulled by endless rocks and roots. You sigh and pat the old oxen, who gives you a look as if to say, "Not this again." The animal's breath steams in the cold morning air, and you grip the leather reins with hands that feel stiff and swollen. As you try to get the ox moving, it plants its hooves stubbornly in the mud, eyes half closed, chewing lazily. You pull, you coax, you mutter a few choice words you'd never say in front of the priest. The ox finally lurches forward, and the plow shudders to life, carving a slow, wobbly line through the earth. The smell of freshly turned soil fills your nose, rich, earthy, almost sweet in a way. You guide the beast as best you can, but the mud is thick, clinging to your boots, and the plow wheels like glue. Each step feels like it weighs 100 pounds. Your arms ache from the strain. Your shoulders burn, and your breath comes in ragged, frosty puffs. The sun, weak and pale as a candle stub, crawls higher in the sky. You watch a pair of crows arguing over something shiny, maybe a scrap of cloth or a broken buckle, and wonder if they've got the better life. They don't have to pay taxes, that's for sure. You pass a neighbor, John the Miller, who's been drafted to help with the plowing today. He waves grimly, his face smeared with dirt, and shouts over the wind. "This mud'll swallow us whole before the day's out." You grin, though your hands are numb, and you shout back, "We'll be planting fish soon, not wheat." That little joke carries you a few paces further, but soon the weight of the plow, the stubbornness of the ox, and the sheer endlessness of the field drag you back into a slow, aching rhythm. It's funny. Historians still argue whether the heavy plow really revolutionized medieval farming, or if it just shifted the back-breaking work from man to beast. Either way, from where you're standing, it sure feels like you're still doing the lion's share of the work. You stop to wipe your brow, the cold air making your sweat feel like ice. Your fingers cramp around the reins, and a knot of muscle tightens between your shoulder blades. A dull, throbbing pain that makes you wince. You know that later, when you finally get to rest, it'll feel like someone's driven a stake straight through your spine. A child runs past on the path, barefoot and grinning, clutching a wooden stick like a sword. You smile faintly, remembering when you had the energy to pretend you were a knight instead of a plowman. Now the closest you get to a sword is a broken hoe, and your battles are with mud and rocks, not dragons. The ox snorts suddenly, dragging your attention back as the plow lurches sideways into a rut. You stumble, nearly falling into the muck, and curse under your breath. The smell of manure and wet earth fills your nose, and a splatter of mud lands on your face. You don't bother wiping it off. You'll be filthy by the end of the day anyway. You pause to straighten the plow, and as you do, you hear the faint ringing of the village bell. Not for mass, not for a feast day, just the steady, predictable chime marking the hour. Another hour gone, many more to go. You glance at the sky, the clouds hanging low and heavy. Rain is coming. You can feel it in your bones, and the thought makes your stomach twist. If the fields flood, there will be no planting, no harvest, no bread come winter, and no bread means no hope. But for now, you grit your teeth, tighten your grip, and keep moving forward, one muddy step at a time. The Reeve's voice cuts through the air like a dull blade. "Faster, you lot. If you've got time to breathe, you've got time to work." His tone is sharp, but it's not anger. Just the daily bark of a man who has to keep the fields moving, or risk the Lord's displeasure. Still, it grates on you. You glance over your shoulder and see him standing there, arms crossed, his cloak flapping in the breeze like a dark, tattered flag. The Reeve, your local overseer, part tax collector, part taskmaster, doesn't miss much. His eyes narrow as he watches your slow progress, and you can almost hear his thoughts. Lazy peasants, always slowing down, always behind schedule. He strides closer, his boots making squelching sounds in the wet field, and you brace yourself. "That furrow's crooked," he mutters, pointing at the uneven line you've just carved. "Straighten it up, or the Lord'll think we're all drunk." You nod, biting back a retort. What you want to say is that the ox is stubborn, the plow's half broken, and your back feels like it's made of splinters, but instead you just mumble, "Yes, master." That's the safest thing to say, after all. The reeve's not exactly cruel. He's a peasant too, after all. But he's the one who gets yelled at if the fields aren't done, so he yells at you. It's a chain of misery from the Lord down to the ox, and you're somewhere near the bottom. As you adjust the plow, you overhear a few other peasants grumbling under their breath. Thomas mutters something about the reeve's crooked back, like a question mark, that one. Another man whispers a joke about the reeve's wife and her extra visits to the manor. You chuckle softly, careful to keep your voice low. Humor is about the only thing that keeps you going some days. Historians still debate whether reeves were truly oppressive figures or simply overworked middlemen caught between the nobility and the peasants. Some say they wielded too much power, skimming from the top and keeping the peasants under their boots. Others argue they were often scapegoats for a system that crushed everyone equally. From where you stand, soaked in mud, sore in every joint, you think the answer is yes. The reeve moves on, shouting at another worker, and you feel a strange mix of relief and frustration. It's like when the clouds clear for a moment, only to let the sun glare directly into your eyes. You know he'll be back soon, pacing the fields like a buzzard waiting for something to die. Your stomach growls, and you rub at the ache in your side. It's almost midday. You start to count the minutes until the small break for the noon meal. Just enough time to gulp down some pottage and maybe stretch your back before the next round of labor. You catch sight of a bird, a lark maybe, fluttering down onto a fence post, pecking at a bit of grain. You watch it for a few seconds, envying its freedom, its lightness, its ability to just leave. If you could fly, where would you go? Not that far, probably. Just to the edge of the village, maybe the woods, maybe the river. Somewhere the reeve's voice can't reach. But for now, you grip the reins tighter, grit your teeth, and keep the plow straight. The earth needs turning, the crops need planting, and the Lord needs his share. Your body aches, your feet are numb, and your hands are raw. But the work has to be done. The reeve's voice fades into the background as you settle into a rhythm, your boots sinking into the mud, the ox's slow, stubborn steps dragging you forward. The air smells like wet earth, sweat, and the faint tang of manure. And you feel a strange sort of peace settle over you. It's not joy, exactly, but it's something. A quiet resignation, maybe. Or just the numb acceptance of another day in the fields. The clouds shift overhead. The wind picks up, and you pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. You hear the reeve yelling again in the distance, but you let it wash over you like the wind. For now, you're just here, in the mud, in the cold, moving forward one slow, aching step at a time. At last, the bell rings for the midday meal, a small mercy in an otherwise relentless day. You pull the plow to a halt, the ox grateful for the pause, and wipe the sweat from your brow with a sleeve already stiff with dried mud. The ache in your shoulders flares as you stretch, and you can't help but let out a soft groan, half relief, half pain. Your boots squelch as you trudge back toward the village, stomach gnawing at itself, with a hunger that's somehow both sharp and dull. You can almost taste the meal waiting for you. A thin pottage, little more than hot water, with a few floating scraps of vegetables, if the cook was lucky enough to find some. The smell hits you as you approach the communal cooking fire. a mixture of smoke, boiling greens, and something faintly sour that makes your nose wrinkle. You sit on an overturned bucket near the fire, your body sinking into the familiar bone-deep fatigue, and accept the bowl passed your way. The pottage sloshes inside, lukewarm, a dull gray color with a few limp leaves and maybe, just maybe, a shred of carrot if you're lucky. You take a tentative sip. It's bland, almost flavorless, but the warmth alone is worth savoring. You cradle the bowl in your hands like a precious treasure, feeling the heat seep into your chilled fingers. Beside you, a few others slurp quietly, heads down, lost in their own hunger. There's Agnes again, now with her toddler balanced on her lap, trying to spoon bits of pottage into his mouth while he fusses. Old Thomas grumbles about the lack of meat. In my day, we had bacon in the pot, not just leaves. And someone else mutters that the Lord's table is probably groaning under the weight of roasted meats and fresh bread. You smirk softly but keep your head down. Complaining won't change much, but it does fill the air like the smoke from the fire. A shared frustration that everyone breathes in together. Historians still argue whether peasants truly lived on little more than pottage, or whether they had more varied diets when the harvest was good. There are records of bread, cheese, ale, and even the occasional rabbit or pigeon stew, but those feel like luxuries when you're staring into a bowl of thin soup that barely coats your stomach. A stray dog wanders by, ribs showing under patchy fur, its nose twitching at the smell of the pottage. You toss it a crust of bread, watching as it wolfs it down with a desperation that mirrors your own. Someone strikes up a quiet tune on a reed pipe, a melody that drifts above the low murmur of voices. It's a sad, meandering thing, but there's a hint of beauty in it. A reminder that even in the hardest times, people find ways to hold on to music, to stories, to the tiny moments that make life more than just survival. Your fingers brush the wooden spoon, rough and worn smooth from years of use. The pottage is nearly gone, but you scrape the last bits from the bowl, not wanting to waste even a drop. You lick the spoon, tasting the faint bitterness of wild herbs, maybe a bit of nettle, maybe dock leaves, the kinds of things foragers pull from the hedgerows when there's little else to eat. As you stand to return the bowl, your joints creak like an old door. The fire's warmth lingers on your face, but the chill creeps back into your bones as soon as you step away. The ox stands nearby, chewing lazily on a tuft of grass, its breath rising in soft clouds. You sigh and give its side a gentle pat, the rough hair bristling against your palm. There's still a long afternoon ahead, and you'll need every ounce of strength you can muster. The pottage wasn't much, but it's better than nothing. And in this life, you learn quickly not to expect more. As the bell tolls again, calling you back to the fields, you take one last look at the fire, the smoke curling into the pale sky. Then you turn, boots heavy, shoulders heavier, and shuffle back toward the plow. The ache in your back sharpens with every step, each movement a reminder that you've been up since before the sun, and that there's still a long stretch of daylight ahead. As you pick up the plow reins once more, you notice your hands, red, raw, and chapped, with little cuts along your knuckles where the rope has rubbed skin thin. It stings when the wind brushes over them, like tiny, icy needles. Old Thomas, hobbling nearby, catches your wince and chuckles under his breath. "You need a poultice for that, lad," he says, voice creaky as the ox cart's axle. You glance at him, unsure whether he's serious or just teasing. but he's already reaching into a leather pouch hanging from his belt. He pulls out a small bundle wrapped in linen and unfolds it, revealing a mash of herbs mixed with, is that animal fat? The smell is pungent, a strange mix of earthiness and something sour that makes your nose wrinkle. Rub it on, he insists, pressing the bundle into your hand. Comfrey for the swelling pig fat to keep it on. 2. You grimace but smear a bit onto your aching knuckles anyway, the cool grease seeping into the cracks. It feels unpleasantly slimy, but the pain does seem to ease a little. Where'd you learn that? You ask, and he shrugs. My gran said it'd keep the devils out of your joints. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies actually worked or were just hopeful superstition passed down through generations. Some claim that plants like comfrey do have anti-inflammatory properties, while others argue it was more about the ritual, the sense of doing something when life gave you so few options. You wonder if it's a bit of both. As the afternoon drags on, the wind sharpens, cutting through your thin tunic like a blade. Your breath fogs in the air, and your nose starts to run, but you wipe it on your sleeve and keep pushing forward. The ox is moving slower now, stubbornly dragging its feet, and you can't blame it. You feel like doing the same. A group of children runs by on the path, laughing, kicking a ball of bundled rags. You pause for a moment to watch, a faint smile tugging at your lips despite the fatigue. They've got dirt-smudged faces, bare feet red from the cold, and voices bright with mischief. One of them shouts, "Look out! It's the Reeves shadow!" And they scatter like frightened sparrows. The sight makes you shake your head. Even in a world where the plow and the tax collector loom large, kids will always find a way to play. A sudden gust sends a flurry of dust and straw into your face, and you cough, spitting out bits of hay. You glance toward the church, its tower standing tall against the gray sky, and think for a moment about the priest, probably inside, muttering prayers over a cracked Bible, warm in his robes, while the rest of you freeze outside. You mutter a quick prayer of your own, though whether it's a plea for strength or simply a grumble of frustration, you're not sure. You flex your hands again, feeling the strange, greasy sheen of the poultice still clinging to your skin. It's not pleasant, but the ache seems to have dulled a little. Or maybe you're just too numb to care anymore. The clouds darken, promising rain before sunset, and a few fat droplets splatter onto your cheeks. You glance up, grimacing, as the wind shifts and blows the rain sideways, straight into your face. The ox grumbles, and you can almost swear it's sighing in resignation. With a weary breath, you lean into the plow once more, mud clinging to your boots, the weight of the earth itself pressing down on your shoulders. You wonder as you drag the blade through the sodden soil whether you'll wake up tomorrow with your back completely locked up, or whether you'll simply do it all again because there's no other choice. The smell hits you before you even reach the pen. A sharp, sour mix of wet straw, dung, and the distinct, pungent reek of animals that have been penned up for too long. You scrunch your nose, but there's no avoiding it. It's your turn to muck out the pens, and the animals, blissfully ignorant of the smell, blink at you with innocent, wide-eyed stares. You grab the pitchfork leaning against the fence and step into the enclosure, the straw squelching underfoot, a thick, sticky mess clinging to your boots like glue. The pigs snuffle in the corner, their pink snouts poking through the muck, while the goats eye you with a mixture of suspicion and mild annoyance. The first forkful is the worst. The pile is damp, heavy, and somehow steams in the cold air. A reminder of just how much heat and, frankly, stink these animals can produce. You gag a little as you lift the load, trying not to think about what exactly you're shoveling, and toss it onto the growing pile outside. The wind shifts, and for a brief moment, you catch a whiff of something worse, like sour milk and rotting cabbage had an argument in your nose. You pause, wiping your forehead with the back of your hand, only to smear a streak of dirt, or is that something else, across your cheek. Lovely. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants really did this work daily, or whether it was shared around more evenly. Some records suggest certain villagers were specifically tasked with mucking out the pens, while others claim it was simply another job in the endless rotation of duties. You reckon it's probably a mix. Today it's your turn, tomorrow someone else's, but no matter what, the job never really goes away. The animals don't care whose day it is. You glance at the pigs, one of them rooting happily in the corner, completely oblivious to your suffering. There's a half-formed thought in your mind about the irony of it all. You feed them, clean up after them, and someday, if you're lucky, they'll feed you. The circle of life, medieval style. Your hands ache from gripping the pitchfork, and your back protests every time you bend down to gather more of the filthy straw. You swear under your breath as you step in a particularly wet patch, the cold squelch soaking through your worn boots. You remember hearing someone, maybe your grandfather, say that pigs were considered a kind of walking larder in the Middle Ages. Every part of the animal could be used: meat for stews, fat for cooking and soap making, bristles for brushes, even the bladder for making footballs. Right now, though, you're less concerned with future sausage and more with not slipping and landing face first in the mess. As you shovel, you can't help but imagine a different life. Maybe as a craftsman, sitting by a warm fire, shaping wood or hammering iron. But then again, the blacksmith's got his own blisters and the carpenter's got splinters and the reeve, well, no one likes the reeve. A chicken wanders into the pen, pecking at something in the straw, and you shoo it away with a tired wave. The sun's moved a little higher, but the clouds are thickening, and the air feels damp, heavy with the promise of more rain. You think about the roof of your hut, patched together with reeds and a bit of old cloth, and wonder if it'll hold through the next storm. Probably not. You pause for a moment, leaning on the pitchfork, and catch a whiff of yourself. Let's just say no medieval perfume is strong enough to cover that. You shake your head, laugh under your breath, and get back to work, because what else is there? The pigs don't muck themselves out. You shovel, you sweat, and you try not to breathe too deeply. The hours stretch on, and the pile outside grows higher, steaming gently in the cold air like some unholy offering to the gods of agriculture. By the time you're done, your arms feel like they might just fall off, and your boots are caked in layers of filth that you don't even want to think about. But the pens are cleaner, the animals fed, and the job, for now, is done. You take a deep breath, instantly regretting it, and step outside, gulping in the fresh air like it's the finest wine. You wipe your hands on your tunic, which is already stained beyond redemption, and glance at the sky. There's still more work to be done. There always is. But for now, you allow yourself the briefest moment of satisfaction before trudging back towards the fields. The church bell tolls, a low, solemn sound that drifts across the fields and pens, cutting through the murmur of the animals and the creak of the plows. You glance up, wiping a streak of something unpleasant off your sleeve, and sigh. Time for the priest's midday service. You trudge toward the church, boots heavy with muck, shoulders stiff from shoveling, stomach gnawing with that dull, endless hunger that never quite goes away. The church itself is a small, squat building of weathered stone, its thatched roof patched with moss and straw, its door sagging slightly on its hinges. A wooden cross leans crookedly above the entry, and the tiny windows, just slits in the wall, really, let in only a pale, watery light. Inside, it smells of damp wood, old wax, and a hint of incense so faint you wonder if it's just wishful thinking. The priest stands at the front, already muttering the opening prayers in Latin, his voice a soft drone that blends with the sound of shuffling feet as villagers file in, heads bowed. You find a spot near the back, grateful to lean against the cool stone wall, though it presses into your spine like a row of dull knives. The Latin flows over you, mostly meaningless. Gloria Patri, et Filio, et Spiritui Sancto. But you know the rhythm, the cadence, the points where you're supposed to murmur an amen or cross yourself. You do it all, not so much out of belief as out of habit, and maybe a little fear. After all, you've heard stories about what happens to those who skip church too often. Whispers of curses, of misfortune, of angry priests who might just tell the reeve that you're shirking your duties. As you stand there, stomach growling louder than the priest's words, your mind starts to wander. You notice the faded fresco on the wall, an image of the Last Judgment, with devils dragging sinners down by their hair. The paint is flaking, and the devil's face looks more like a goat than a demon, but the message is clear enough. Stay in line or else. You glance around at the others. Old Thomas is there, lips moving silently, his hands folded tightly, as if holding in a secret. Agnes rocks her baby, who's mercifully asleep for once, while her other little one fidgets at her side, drawing shapes in the dirt on the floor with a stubby finger. A few rows up, you spot the Lord's steward, his fine wool cloak neatly draped over his shoulders, a faint smirk on his lips, as if the prayers don't quite apply to him. You wonder what he ate for breakfast. Probably real bread, maybe even a bit of salted fish or honey. Your own stomach twists at the thought. Historians still debate how much Latin the average peasant understood during these services. Some argue that it was all a mystery, a string of sounds that blurred together like the hum of bees. Others suggest that people picked up bits and pieces over time, enough to follow the basic ideas, if not the exact words. You figure it's a bit like listening to the reeve's orders, mostly noise, with a few clear words like taxes or tithes that make your blood run cold. The priest lifts his hands in blessing, and the congregation mumbles a tired amen. The bell tolls again, a flat, dull clang that feels like the closing of a door. You shuffle outside with the others, blinking at the pale daylight, feeling the chill settle back into your bones. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, and you wonder if there's a crust of bread left somewhere in the hut. The afternoon chores are waiting. More plowing, a fence to mend, maybe a broken bucket that needs patching. But for now, you pause for a moment outside the church, watching as a pair of birds flits from the thatched roof into the bare branches of the tree nearby. The breeze ruffles your hair, and you take a slow breath, letting the cold sting your lungs. The church service didn't fill your belly or ease your aches, but it's done. And in this life, you take your small victories where you can. The clouds have thickened into a dull gray blanket, hanging low over the village like a promise of trouble. The wind whistles through the gaps in the huts, and the scent of damp earth rises, sharp and heavy. You glance up at your roof, patched and sagging in places, and you know that if you don't fix it soon, you'll be sleeping in a puddle tonight. So you grab an armful of reeds and a few rough wooden pegs and haul yourself up onto the rickety ladder, leaning against your home. The ladder creaks under your weight, and for a heart-stopping second, you wonder if it'll collapse. It holds, barely, and you cling to it with frozen fingers, the chill cutting through your sleeves like a blade. Up on the roof, the wind is sharper, and your footing is treacherous. One wrong step and you'll be flat in the mud with a twisted ankle, or worse. You crouch low, balancing on the beams, and start weaving the reeds into the thatch, tucking them in where the rain has made gaps. Your fingers are clumsy with cold, the reeds scratching your skin, the pegs splintering under your thumb. A gust of wind yanks a handful of thatch from your grip, and you curse softly, watching it tumble down into the mud. You glance across the village, seeing other roofs in various states of disrepair. A few men are doing the same as you, crouched like damp crows on the rooftops, muttering under their breath. The women have gathered near the cook fires, tending to small chores, mending, spinning, watching the little ones play in the dirt. A chicken clucks indignantly as a child chases it with a stick, giggling. There's a strange sense of solidarity in this, you think. A shared struggle to keep the rain out, the cold at bay, the walls standing. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants felt a sense of community pride in their villages, or whether survival was more of an every-man for himself affair. You suspect it's a bit of both. After all, when the storm comes, you'll all be soaked together. And when the harvest fails, you'll all go hungry. You press the reeds tighter into the gaps, fingers numb and clumsy, and squint up at the sky. The clouds are darker now, bloated with rain, and a few fat drops spatter against your face. The smell of wet earth rises stronger, and you hurry your work, jamming the pegs in place, tying them with bits of twine that fray under the tension. Your knees ache from crouching, and your back twinges when you twist to reach a gap near the chimney. You mutter a few words under your breath, not exactly prayers, but not curses either, more like exhausted groans aimed at the universe. The wind shifts, and a cold gust slaps you in the face, nearly knocking you off balance. You hunker down, pressing close to the roof, heart thudding in your chest. The thought of falling flashes across your mind. How the ground would rise up fast, how the mud would splatter, how the pain would bloom hot and sharp. You shake your head and refocus. A small bundle of reeds slips from your hands and flutters down like a sad little flag, landing on the pile of old, wet straw below. You sigh, already calculating how many more you'll need to finish the patch. From somewhere nearby, you hear the creak of another ladder and a muffled curse. Someone else has slipped. You glance over and catch Thomas, halfway up his roof, shaking his fist at the sky. You can't help but chuckle softly. The wind howls through the village, rattling shutters and tugging at cloaks. A dog barks, then falls silent. You keep working, tucking and pressing, weaving the reeds as best you can, the rhythm almost hypnotic. The smell of damp thatch, wood smoke, and the faint tang of manure fills your nose. Your fingers are scraped raw, your back aches, and the rain has started in earnest, cold and insistent, soaking through your tunic and trickling down your spine. But you finish the patch, at least for now. You climb down slowly, boots slipping on the slick ladder rungs, and when your feet finally hit the mud, you let out a long, shuddering breath. You wipe your hands on your tunic, smearing more mud than you remove, and glance up at the roof. It's still crooked, still patchy, but it might hold for one more storm. Maybe. You look around at the village. Smoke curling from chimneys, rain pattering on thatch, the steady, stubborn work of people trying to keep the world from falling in on them. It's not much, but it's yours, and for now, that's enough. Just as you think you might catch a moment's breath, the clatter of hooves and the creak of a cart announce a new visitor, a tax collector. Of course, the man rides into the village like he owns it, his cloak flapping dramatically in the wind, a smug little smirk on his face as he looks down at the peasants around him. He's wearing a hat, tall and felted, and boots that gleam with a shine no one around here can afford. His cart rattles behind him, loaded with sacks and baskets that you know aren't his to keep. "Good day, good people," he calls out in a tone that suggests he doesn't think it's a good day at all. At least not for you. His scribe, a thin, sour-looking man with ink-stained fingers, hops down from the cart, already unrolling a scroll. Your gut twists. You glance at your neighbors. Thomas frowns. Agnes pulls her little ones closer, and the rest of you shuffle into a rough half-circle, like sheep corralled into a pen. The collector points at the scroll and begins reading names. A slow, deliberate drawl that seems designed to make your stomach sink even lower. Your name comes up, of course. 1 measure of grain, he declares. 3 eggs. A pause as he consults the list. And 1 chicken. A collective sigh ripples through the group. A chicken. That's no small thing. You trudge back to your hut, heart heavy, and fetch the requested items. The grain you scoop from the barrel, wincing at how light it's getting. The eggs, small, still speckled with straw dust. You pull from the basket, muttering a soft apology to the hen. And the chicken, well, that one's harder. You chase it around the yard for a few minutes, slipping in the mud as it flaps and squawks, feathers flying, before you finally grab it by the legs. It kicks furiously, and you try not to think about the pot of stew it could have been. When you return, the collector barely looks at you, just waves the scribe forward to tally your payment. The scribe glances at the offerings, sniffs disdainfully at the chicken, and makes a little mark on the scroll. You can't help but notice the fine quill he's using, goose feather, sharp as a knife. Historians still argue about just how much tax a medieval peasant owed. Some say it was a crushing burden that left people hungry, while others claim it was manageable. A small price for protection and the Lord's favor. Standing here, with your arms full of precious food, you know which side you fall on. The collector moves down the line, taking a jug of milk from Agnes, a sack of barley from Thomas, a small bundle of herbs from an old widow who looks like the wind could knock her over. Each person hands over what they can, and each time, the collector accepts it with a nod that somehow manages to be both smug and disinterested. When it's done, he gives a shallow bow, mocking almost, and climbs back into his cart. The scribe tucks the scroll under his arm, and they ride off without another word, leaving behind the damp, gray village a little poorer than before. You stand there for a moment, clutching the empty basket, watching the cart disappear down the rutted path. The chicken's squawks still ring in your ears, and your stomach growls. A hollow, bitter sound. Thomas mutters something dark under his breath about the collector's mother, and you can't help but chuckle softly, though the humor feels thin and brittle. Agnes sighs, bouncing her baby on her hip, and says quietly, At least we're not in debt. Yet. You nod, though the thought lingers in your mind like a cold stone. Yet. The wind picks up again, rattling the shutters on the huts, sending a shiver down your spine. There's still work to do. Always more to do. But for a moment, you just stand there, feeling the weight of the day settle on your shoulders like a too heavy cloak. You think about the chicken, its warmth in your hands, the soft rustle of its feathers, and you wonder how long you can keep giving things up before there's nothing left to give. But the sun keeps crawling across the sky, the clouds thickening, the wind biting sharper, and you know, there's no time to dwell. The work won't wait. With a sigh, you turn back toward the fields, the pens, the roof that still leaks, and the endless grind of survival. As the sun dips lower, casting long, slanted shadows across the village, you finally find a sliver of time to catch your breath. And where does a weary peasant go at the end of a bone-cracking day? The alehouse, of course, not for a feast, mind you, just for a bit of weak ale and the company of others, equally exhausted, equally grimy, and equally in need of a laugh or two. You step inside, and the air is warm, though thick with the smells of unwashed bodies, spilled ale, and the faint, lingering aroma of yesterday's turnip stew. The floor is packed earth, sticky in places, and the low ceiling is darkened by years of smoke. A single tallow candle flickers in the corner, its light barely reaching the edges of the room. A handful of villagers sit hunched at rough wooden tables, mugs in hand. The ale is cloudy, thin, and barely strong enough to make your head spin, but it's better than nothing. You hand over a small coin, one you'd hoped to save, and the innkeeper, a wide-shouldered woman with arms like tree trunks, sloshes a portion into a battered cup. You take a sip. It's sour, almost vinegary, but it warms your belly in a way the thin pottage never quite manages. At the next table, a cluster of men leans close together, swapping stories. One is telling a joke about the reeve, something about his crooked nose, and how it points toward the manor like a weathercock. It's not a good joke, but after a day of shoveling muck, patching roofs, and handing over your last good chicken to the taxman, it's enough. You chuckle, a low, tired sound, and take another sip of ale. A scrawny man with a missing tooth strums a battered lute in the corner, the strings worn thin, the tune half-hearted. It's a rambling ballad about a knight who gets lost in the woods, mistakes a farmer's wife for a fairy, and ends up with a black eye and a stolen purse. You let the story drift over you, the words like a soft wave, the melody weaving in and out of the murmured voices. Historians still argue whether alehouses were really centers of community life, or more like a last-ditch escape from the drudgery of peasant life. Some say they were lively hubs where people shared news, gossip, and laughter. Others think they were places of quiet desperation, where weary souls clung to their cups like lifelines. Sitting here, you think maybe it's a bit of both. The fire in the hearth is down to embers, but you stretch your cold fingers toward it anyway, savoring the faint warmth. Someone nearby breaks into a rough song, a bawdy tune about a miller's daughter and her lost apron. Thinly veiled and not exactly poetic, but it draws a few snickers. You find yourself smiling, though your body aches all over. It's strange, isn't it? After a day that would break the strongest ox, here you are, still upright, still breathing, still sharing a laugh in the flickering half-light. A scuffle breaks out near the door. Two lads arguing over a spilled mug, but it fizzles out quickly, one of them muttering an apology as the other rubs his shoulder. No one has the energy for a real fight tonight. The alehouse hums with the quiet drone of exhausted voices, the occasional burst of laughter, and the soft scrape of mugs on wood. It's a worn, weathered symphony, a soundtrack of lives stitched together by dirt, sweat, and stubbornness. As you finish your drink, you glance toward the door, the cold wind slipping through the cracks and tugging at your sleeves. The fire's warmth fades the moment you step outside, the chill settling back into your bones like it never left. The moon is rising, pale and distant, and the path back to your hut glimmers faintly with damp. You take a slow breath, letting the cold bite into your lungs, and head back home. Tomorrow will come, and with it, the same grind. The fields, the ox, the mud, the taxes, the aching muscles, and maybe, if you're lucky, a seat by the fire and a sip of ale to wash it all down. For now, you just keep walking, one foot in front of the other, your boots sinking into the soft earth, your breath curling like smoke in the night air. You step back into the hut, the door creaking softly on its hinges as you push it closed against the wind. The air inside is warmer than outside, but only just. The fire has burned down to a few glowing coals, and the room smells faintly of smoke, damp wool, and something else. Stale, like old straw and bodies too long cooped up together. Your wife glances up from the corner, where she's rocking the baby, her eyes shadowed and tired. The little one's breathing is shallow but steady, the soft sound of a tiny cough rattling every so often in his chest. A reminder that the cold is more than an inconvenience, it's a threat. You give her a faint, weary smile, and she nods as if to say, "We're still here, aren't we?" Your bed, if it can be called that, is a low wooden frame stuffed with straw, scratchy and lumpy, a few flattened patches of wool draped over it like a half-hearted attempt at comfort. You sink onto it with a groan, every joint protesting, your body aching in places you didn't even know you had muscles. The straw pokes through the fabric, sharp against your skin, and as you shift to find a spot that doesn't feel like lying on a sack of thorns, a tiny telltale itch starts on your leg. You scratch only for the itch to spread. A second later, you feel a faint, unmistakable tickle, a tiny insect skittering across your ankle. Bedbugs. Of course, historians still argue whether medieval homes were truly overrun with vermin, or whether this is an exaggerated image from later accounts. Some say bedbugs were a constant nuisance along with fleas and lice, while others suggest that with simple living, homes were cleaner than we imagine. Judging by the squirm in your straw mattress, you'd put your coin on the vermin. You shift again, trying to ignore the itch, pulling the thin blanket up to your chin. It smells faintly of smoke and sheep, and it's not exactly warm, but it's better than nothing. The wind whistles through the gaps in the walls, making the candle flicker, casting long, jittery shadows across the walls. The roof creaks as the rain starts, tapping lightly at first, then building into a steady patter. You hold your breath, waiting to see if the patch job will hold, and for a few moments it seems like it might. Then, plop. A cold droplet lands square on your forehead, followed by another on your cheek. You sigh, pulling the blanket tighter, curling into yourself like a hedgehog bracing for a storm. The children shift in their sleep, little sighs and murmurs breaking the silence. Your wife mutters softly to herself as she strokes the baby's hair. And outside, the wind picks up, howling low and mournful like a hungry animal. You stare at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance, feeling the aches in your body settle in like old friends. Your hands throb from gripping the plow, your shoulders burn from the pitchfork, and your knees ache from crouching on the roof. It's a symphony of small pains that blend into a dull, relentless hum. Somewhere in the dark, a mouse scurries across the floor, its tiny claws clicking on the wood. You close your eyes and breathe, slow and deep, feeling the cold seep into your bones, the damp rising from the earth itself. Tomorrow will bring the same: fields to plow, animals to feed, perhaps another visit from the tax collector if the reeve is feeling particularly cruel. You wonder, not for the first time, how long you can keep this up, whether your body will give out before the next harvest, whether the next illness will take someone in your family before the year is out. But for now, you're here. You're breathing. You're alive, even if just barely. And in this life, that counts for something. You close your eyes, the sound of the rain filling your ears, the wind rattling the shutters, the faint smell of damp straw and wood smoke settling into your clothes. You feel the cold creep in, the bedbugs crawling, the roof dripping, and you breathe long and slow until the aches fade into the background and sleep starts to tug at the edges of your mind. The night passes slowly, with the wind rattling the shutters and the occasional creak of the roof making you flinch. Sleep comes in fits and starts, shallow and restless, never quite deep enough to erase the ache from your bones. And when you do drift off, the dreams are strange and jumbled. Half-remembered prayers mixed with worries about taxes, the reeve's voice barking orders, the soft squelch of mud underfoot, and somewhere in the distance, the faint cluck of a chicken you'll never get back. You wake to a sound that makes your stomach twist. Hushed voices close to the window, whispering in low, urgent tones. You sit up slowly, the straw creaking under you, and strain to listen. If the rains don't stop, not enough grain left. Heard from the next village, their fields flooded, lost half the barley. Said the priests warned of famine, a sign from God, maybe odd. Your stomach clenches. Famine. The word hovers in the air like a dark cloud. You rub at your face, feeling the grit of a poor night's sleep under your fingers. The rain is still tapping at the roof, slower now but steady, each drop a reminder of what too much water can do to the fields. You pull on your tunic, still damp from yesterday's work, and step outside. The air is heavy with moisture, the ground soft and sucking at your boots. The fields in the distance look sodden, little rivers of runoff carving paths through the furrows. You squint at the sky, low, gray, and bloated with clouds. Your wife joins you, holding the baby close to her chest, a worry line deepening between her brows. If the harvest fails, she starts, but the words die in her throat. You nod, understanding without needing to hear the rest. The other villagers are stirring, moving slowly, their faces etched with worry. Old Thomas stands near the path, his stick planted firmly in the mud, shaking his head. Happened once, years back, he mutters, when I was a boy. People starved, ate the bark off trees, they did. His voice trails off into a rasping cough. Historians still argue whether medieval famines were as frequent as we imagine, or whether they loomed larger in memory than in fact. Some records show harvest failures every few years, while others suggest that people muddled through, sharing what little they had, stretching thin rations across seasons. Either way, the fear was real. And right now, standing in the damp chill of the morning, it feels very real indeed. You try to shake it off. There's work to do, rain or no. The animals need tending, the fence has a broken slat, and you promised Agnes you'd help mend her roof before the next storm. You sigh and grab a handful of hay to feed the goats, feeling the coarse stalks prickle your palms. As you work, you can't help but glance back at the fields, the mud swallowing the furrows, the rain-soaked earth glistening under the dull light. You think of the grain stored in the granary, never enough, and the eggs in the basket, too few. You wonder if you'll make it through the winter, if your children will have enough to eat, if there'll be bread or just thin pottage, thinner every day. The worry sits in your belly like a stone. But you keep moving, keep working, because what else can you do? You tie up the fence with rough twine, your fingers fumbling in the cold, the knots uneven but holding. You pass Thomas, who nods at you with a grim sort of respect, and Agnes, who gives you a tired smile as she tugs her shawl tighter against the wind. The baby on her hip lets out a wail, and she shushes him gently, rocking back and forth like a tree bending in the breeze. You look up at the sky again, and for a moment, you let yourself hope. Maybe the rains will stop. Maybe the fields will dry. Maybe there'll be enough barley to grind into flour, enough eggs to boil, enough beans to stretch the stew, maybe. But the clouds stay heavy, and the air stays damp. And you know, this life is a gamble. Every day, every season. And sometimes the house wins. Night settles over the village once more. And with it comes the creeping chill that seems to seep into your very bones. The fire in the hearth sputters low, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. The children are asleep, their small bodies curled tightly under rough blankets, while your wife hums softly under her breath, a lullaby half remembered from her own childhood. But sleep doesn't come easily tonight. The wind whispers through the cracks in the walls, and the rain taps a slow, persistent rhythm on the roof. You lie on the straw mattress, eyes open, watching the patterns of light and shadow dance across the ceiling. The air feels thick, heavy, and every sound seems sharper in the dark. A distant howl echoes across the fields. Maybe a wolf, maybe just the wind playing tricks. Either way, you pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. Your breath curls in the cold air, and you feel the faint itch of a flea bite on your wrist. But you're too tired to scratch. Superstitions start to creep in, uninvited. You glance at the onion you hung by the door last week, meant to ward off sickness, and wonder if it's enough. Probably not. There's the bundle of dried herbs over the hearth, too. Sage and rosemary tied with string, meant to keep bad spirits at bay. Your grandmother used to say that if you heard the wind howling just after midnight, it meant the witches were abroad, flying on the storm. You shiver and close your eyes, but your mind won't stop spinning. What if the roof gives way? What if the damp brings fever? What if the tax collector comes back? Or the reeve demands more than you have? Historians still debate just how deeply superstition shaped medieval lives, whether people truly believed in spirits and omens, or whether it was more a way to explain the randomness of bad luck. You figure it's both. When the world feels so fragile, so out of your control, it's comforting, sort of, to think that a sprig of herbs or a whispered charm might make a difference. Your wife's voice breaks the quiet. "Did you hear that?" she whispers. Her eyes glint in the firelight, wide and uncertain. You listen. Nothing but the wind, the creak of the rafters, the distant rustle of the animals in the pen. But then, there it is. A faint thump, somewhere near the edge of the village. Your heart gives a little jump, and you sit up slightly, straining to hear. "Maybe just a branch," you murmur, though your voice is low and not quite convincing. She nods, but doesn't look reassured. She pulls the blanket tighter around the baby, who stirs slightly and lets out a soft sigh. You lie back down, staring at the ceiling once more. The shadows seem to shift, the flickering light turning shapes into faces for a heartbeat before they dissolve. You think of the stories told around the fire, of spirits that walk on stormy nights, of witches with crooked smiles and cold hands, of lights that flicker in the marshes, leading travelers to their doom. You know it's nonsense, probably, but the stories cling like cobwebs. You think of the charm tucked under your mattress, a small bundle of rosemary, thyme, and a tiny silver coin, your grandmother's, passed down for protection. You reach under the straw, feeling it there, cool and smooth. And somehow it helps, not much, but a little. You close your eyes, listening to the wind. It rattles the shutters, whistles through the thatch, makes the walls groan like an old ship at sea. Your body aches, your stomach grumbles, your mind hums with worry. But you breathe slow, steady, and let the sounds of the night wash over you. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles, rain or no rain, taxes or no taxes, spirits or no spirits. For now, you're here, in the dark, with your family breathing softly around you, the fire casting its faint, flickering light. And that for tonight will have to be enough. The darkness feels thicker now, the fire down to a faint red glow, shadows stretching long and deep across the room. Your breath slows, the steady in and out matching the soft, rhythmic creak of the beams in the roof above. The baby sighs in his sleep, your wife's breathing quiet and even beside you. Your body aches everywhere, shoulders tight, hands raw, legs heavy as stones. The day's work has left its mark on you, every muscle stiff, every joint whispering its quiet complaint. But there's also a strange, simple satisfaction. You're here. You did what needed doing, and for another day at least you survived. You let your eyes close, just for a moment, and imagine the fields you'll return to tomorrow. The furrows stretching long and dark under the dawn, the ox's breath steaming in the cold air, the plow groaning through the soil. You think of the pottage bubbling weakly in the pot, the scrape of wooden spoons, the laughter that sometimes bubbles up in the alehouse despite it all. And you remember the weight of the day, the tax collector's sharp eyes, the reeve's barked orders, the constant gnawing hunger that never seems quite satisfied. You remember the little things too, the way the rain beaded on the thatch as you patched the roof, the smell of the herbs and the poultice on your hands, the sharp cold that pricked your skin in the fields, the flicker of the candle flame when the wind found a crack in the wall. Historians still debate whether the medieval peasant's life was truly as miserable as we imagine, or whether it had its moments of quiet joy, simple pleasures in a hard world. You think it's probably both. The grind, the hunger, the cold, yes, but also the warmth of a fire, the softness of a child's hair under your hand, the sharp tang of fresh-picked herbs, the laughter that somehow slips in even on the hardest days. Your mind drifts, thoughts slowing, like the embers cooling in the hearth. The sound of the wind fades into a soft hush. The scrape of branches against the walls becomes a lullaby. And the weight of the blankets, thin and scratchy as they are, becomes a comforting pressure, grounding you in this small, imperfect world. The itch of a flea bite tugs at your awareness. But even that fades as your breath slows further. Your muscles loosen, and your thoughts scatter into fragments. A field of barley in the sun, the glint of a coin in the dirt, the sound of a rooster crowing in the early dark. Your body, exhausted, surrenders at last. And as the fire dies low and the night deepens, you drift into sleep, soft and slow, the world slipping away piece by piece. The fire in the hearth flickers lower and lower, the last embers casting a faint, warm glow that barely reaches the walls. Outside, the rain has softened to a gentle patter, like a soft drum beat on the thatch above. The wind hums a low, steady note, and the walls of the hut seem to settle with a sigh. Your breathing slows, matching the quiet rhythm of the world around you. Each inhale draws in the faint scent of wood smoke and straw. Each exhale a soft release of the day's weight. Your body, heavy and worn from the long, hard labor, begins to soften into the straw mattress, the edges of discomfort blurring as sleep takes hold. The sounds of the village fade, a distant cough, the low murmur of voices, the soft rustle of a restless animal. Even the aches in your hands and back seem to melt away under the blanket's thin, familiar weight. You picture the fields, dark and still beneath the moonlight. The furrows stretch long and quiet, waiting for the spring's new seeds. The plow stands in the corner, resting. The oxen sleep in their pens, breath slow and steady. Everything slows, softens, quiets. The worries of the day drift away, like mist rising from the fields at dawn. The world narrows to the warmth of the hearth, the quiet of the hut, and the gentle, steady beat of your own breath. Sleep comes gently, like a soft fog, wrapping around you, pulling you under. And as you sink deeper, let it all go. The work is done for now. You are safe, you are warm, and you are at rest. Good night.